Welcome back to the next edition of the ONLE Networking Show. So news, education and member spotlights from ONLE Networking. I am James West.
And I'm Kelly West, and we're the co-founders of ONLE, the business network for people who like people.
So we've got a very packed show today. We are going to be talking about how to build a global network online. We are going to discuss Steven Barlett telling everyone not to network, even though you should network. We're also going to feature some of the words from our members, wisdom from the members, Kelly's networking gem. We've also got a very special guest, Yvonne Guérineau. That was all right, wasn't it? Did
Perfect.
I say that quite well?
You did really well. Yes.
Welcome to the show, Yvonne. Good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be hearing more from Yvonne later on in the show, but we've got a lot to get through. So let's start. I wanted to highlight this because we like to showcase some of the lovely things that are going on from our members this month. And there was a nice crossover with a few people here. So Elsie Moore, VA extraordinaire. She was inspired by Gaz Morgan's workshop on selling, but also Naomi Light's Only Talks, which was about building a business that accounts for three intelligences: mind, heart, gut. End result is she wrote a post-it note, which she's got next to her computer, and it says, "Is this right for me?" And she refers back to it anytime she's making a decision or anytime she's embarking on something within her business. What a great idea, because this is about setting boundaries, isn't it?
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? Do you think that's, how are you with business? Because you seem to be quite comfortable, Kelly, with merging business and home life. And
Yeah, I'm
personal.
also comfortable being uncomfortable, which is unusual, I think. I think that's perfect. And I think we're actually probably quite similar to that with Elsie. So we have our culture playbook, don't we? And we quite often build any of our business decisions around whether that fits with our culture. So that's our equivalent of Elsie's post-it note. But yeah, of course, I mean, no. Mark Page always used to say, is it going to make you money? And, you know, you can go by that decision, can't you? Gary Morgan will say, does it make the boat go faster?
Yeah.
So it's whatever that thing is that resonates with you and your boundaries, and whether or not you're going to be able and acceptable of moving that forward.
Yeah, sure. Boundaries, business boundaries. We talked about this briefly before. What's your
We
view?
did. And I think the thing with boundaries is if you haven't got any, how can you possibly manage them? And I think a lot of us forget that we need to have some and decide where they are. But my interesting one with the post is somebody said to me recently, what's the point? And kept saying, what's the point? And I thought, actually, that is the point. Why don't I ask myself, what's the point? Those are my boundaries, I think. If I don't know why I'm doing it, then I must be outside of a boundary of some kind.
Yeah.
It's very easy, isn't it, to get sucked into, particularly with online, social media.
Yes.
I'm doing stuff, but is it really building anything? What are you actually trying to achieve?
Yeah, sometimes you're just busy to stay distracted rather than to deal with what's really going on for you. So you get sucked into something that you think everyone else is doing or you should be doing. But unless you say, what's my boundary? What are my values? What's the point? Whatever question you ask yourself, you can lose yourself in the moment. And I think whatever question you ask, it has the same effect, which means it stops you in your tracks and makes you reset and say to yourself, do I actually know why I'm here? Whether I'm leaning in or out of my own values or whatever it is that's happening for me. So you can call it boundaries, you can call it something else. I think it's like a reset button, isn't it?
Definitely.
I think it's when you get to that point where it's just another thing.
Yeah.
And you feel like it's just chipping away. It's at that point, isn't it? You need that post-it note or that sort of statement to go back to.
Little
and we
mantra.
all do it, don't we? We all do it. I was chatting to somebody this week and they were saying they've gone off target and, you know, they've gone a different route. And I'm like, well, just take a step back. That's fine, because life happens and things happen and there's no point beating yourself up for stuff. You just got to work the next way forward, haven't you?
Definitely. So great stuff, Elsie. That was a really good point based on feedback from a lot of members. So the big thing for us at the moment is online networking, global networking. ONLE New York. We've now had 2 meetings for ONLE New York. So we're building a global network. Very exciting. But we've also been talking about dovetailing what we do at networking events with LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the friend, or it should be the friend of all networkers now. Alice Fewens' great Only Talks last month provided some great kind of conversation points, and we got some feedback from the meetings. And I just want to shout out a few of our members that contributed. So Alan Braithwaite, Yellow Tuxedo, this was brilliant. He said 99% of our business relationships come from social media and networking. We've hardly met anyone in person. that just shows you the power. And those guys are prolific, but again, it's about being conversational. Denise Willier, she has become the friend of the ONLE show. She always gets a mention, but this was brilliant. She said, LinkedIn, I think a lot of people will empathise with this. She says, LinkedIn has taken me a while to master, but since I've been more active and social, I've had conversations which have led to inquiries. Brilliant. Just talk to people. Yep. Sass Subi, this was cool. He said, through LinkedIn, I've made connections that have led to me getting business in Petersham, Peckham and Peru. That was a lovely little bit of alliteration, as well as a nice example of global networking. Alice Fewins, she would have a thing to say, wouldn't she? But this is great. Continuing the conversations with people you've met at networking means you're not just seeing them once per month. Yeah. That's so important to get across, because I think we think networking's an event. I've done my networking. You haven't, have you?
It comes around quickly. Really quickly.
We used to do it weekly, didn't we? Well, we're not necessarily doing it weekly anymore. So if you're only going to go monthly, if that's the one exposure, the one conversation you have, well, that's not going to really build the relationship. So that's how you can use LinkedIn for that. Andy Taylor White, this was good. He said, connections I've not spoken to for years and are engaging on my posts.
That's what happened to me.
Did it?
Yeah. So I started off being more, I started off as a CV thing, just stuck myself up there. Then I started thinking, I should post some things. Then I started engaging a little bit. And it's not until I started getting active and conversational that people started popping up that I hadn't seen for years and years. And even this week, people have showed up on my feed with commentary who I haven't seen for 15 years. Wow. So they're all there. It's just most people aren't posting. I think there's a huge proportion of people lurking around in LinkedIn, but it's not that they're not interested. It's not that they're not watching. And sometimes you just have to trigger the something that gives them something to talk about. Yeah. And the sales messages aren't necessarily those ones. No. I've certainly thought when I've posted something that's much more, I do this, I don't get a lot. Yeah. But if it's, I bought a standing desk, or look what grew in my garden, something that's more real, people find it easier to chat, and they want to chat. They want something to talk about.
Yeah. Because they can find out about your profession on your profile.
Completely.
That's the point, isn't
Completely.
it? So great, that was a very good point, Andy. Chris Mansfield, we love this one. Do you remember this?
Yeah, I do.
If I'm going to quote this verbatim, he said, if you send a personalised message that describes a genuine reason why you want to connect with someone, 99% of the time they will accept. That's how you start building a global network, but it's got to be have a specific reason. And then this was the bit that really made us happy. He said, even if life is a bit crap, be upbeat and smile when you network online and have one-to-ones. There's nothing worse than being on a call with someone who does not want to be there. So prepare to be happy. We love that, didn't we? Because it's so true, isn't it? Who's been on one-to-ones, or you sat with people that are like that, don't really want to talk to those people, do you?
No, it's hard sometimes, isn't it? But I think if you're there for a short amount of time, be prepared to be happy. I love that.
So thank you, Chris. Yeah. We enjoyed that one. Gaz Morgan, he said, I prefer speaking, so I use the voice memo function on LinkedIn to build relationships. The fact that it's different to the usual text means it stands out, and the engagement I get is fantastic. Great use of the tool. And finally, there's one more after that. Zach Raven said, LinkedIn helps me develop the connections I make at networking. I connect with them on LinkedIn, continue the conversations, have a one-to-one, and the trust this builds leads to sales inquiries. There's your workflow laid out. And then final point, Richard Hyeron, the lovely Richard Hyeron, he didn't mention James Bond for once, but he did say this: I don't use LinkedIn as a sales platform, I use it to build relationships. So that's a really nice little mantra to end that section on. So there you go, global networking. So you probably, if you're interested in networking, I would be surprised if you didn't see Steven Barlett, the youngest dragon, who's just joined Dragon's Den, talking about networking. And he said, and this isn't embellishment, he literally said on his post, should people go networking? And my answer is don't network. I'll quote him. He said, I use other ways to expand my network. Flocking around a room, introducing myself is exhausting. There's a more scalable way of networking, which is adding value or using the internet, which I've always done. He talks about building a personal brand. What he's saying is, and I actually agree with him, you don't have to network in the traditional way by going to networking events, wandering around aimlessly, kind of giving out business cards. Completely get that. that, you know, we are the embodiment of that. We're an online network. We're using tools like LinkedIn to continue the conversation. All the things that we've just talked about. Still networking though. That's where I have issue, because he said don't network, but network. Just don't network in that way. What did you take from that? Because we really admire Steven.
Yeah, I think at first I was really disappointed because I just sort of had him on a bit of a pedestal and thought, oh, you know, of course, you're not always going to agree with everybody, and that's fine. We've all got different opinions. But I think to make a bold statement like that, but very quickly then back it up with something that kind of is the opposite of what you just said.
Yeah.
Is a bit strange. And I'd love to talk to him about it. I really would. I'd love to find a way of having a chat with him about that. I do agree with him. I absolutely agree with him. And I've had a couple of chats with some social media experts over the last couple of months. And it's a similar feel, but that's the world they're in, and they do that as their day job. They are networking all the time because they're using social media to network. And I think when you get to a certain level, networking for Steven will be very different.
Of course, yeah.
Extremely different, you know. And I think when you're at that space, of course you will look at it differently. But as small business owners, you could argue, well, I'm going to go and walk into that room because I'm not busy today, or I've got a gap in my diary and I don't know what that opportunity is going to give me. So I think, you know, that's not me. I would choose a better way of using my time, but I don't think that's a bad thing for people to be doing, because I do think some chance meetings will happen.
You've got to start somewhere, haven't you?
Somewhere,
What
yeah.
Have you got an opinion on that?
It's really interesting listening to it, because I think it was the idea of aimlessly wandering around the room that I struggled with. Yeah. That's where I went wrong in the early days with networking, because I aimlessly wandered around the room. Complete waste of time. Or even worse, I sometimes went looking for clients. That's even worse than aimlessly wandering around the room. I think that what he's saying really is be a bit targeted and specific about knowing what you do and how you do it and who it's for, and put your energies in the right place.
Yeah.
I think that hasn't changed. I think maybe the platform you go to, or who you do it with, or how many people. But people aren't going to go finding me necessarily the way they would find him. He's already on TV. Do you know, there's a different about networking about someone who's already in the public eye. Yeah.
Steven posts anything and he immediately will get thousands of likes, and
so
that's
does he have to go looking?
It's a very different space to be in, isn't it? And I think what an interesting point from that, given that we've talked about, say, LinkedIn, the fact that you can approach, you can go and talk to anyone if you know how to get into a conversation. Does that mean we no longer need networking events if you can network purely using online tools? I've got an answer to this. I have dropped this on you.
This is a little bomb for us to pick up, is it? So eventually, maybe. I suppose if you are comfortable without... we've moved away from in-person connections, and I've found that quite an easy transition. So I'm quite happy to have my one-to-ones, my meetings on Zoom. I feel extremely comfortable on it. I would even go so far as to say I have better relationships with people. They seem to be more open with me, etc., etc. And I've built some cracking relationships. When I go out and socialise, I want to see people. It's a different space. It's a different thing. Do I think that there could come a point where I could use LinkedIn just to do everything? Yes, of course. But do I want to be in that world where I'm just having messages with people and no real interaction? No.
Yeah.
And I think online networking gives me a good mix with LinkedIn, because I get to speak to those people. One will feed the other, and the network just grows as a result of that.
It gives a focal point
Yeah.
to a networking activity, doesn't it? Have you got a view on that as
Yeah,
well?
I mean, like you just said, I know you wanted to comment on it again, but I think there's something about, especially in the early days when you're a new business, of knowing there is a place to go where there is an appointment at a set time, you turn up, you can put it in your diary. It helps provide structure, particularly for someone who's new to working for themselves, who has to create structure where maybe they had a corporate environment initially, and structure was provided for them to have events to go to, somebody else who organises that time, people who already know what to expect, you can learn from, you can watch in action. If you just go blind into LinkedIn and go, I'm now going to start talking to people at random, how do you know where to begin?
Yeah.
When I was in the corporate world, networking was something you did in the company. To come out of that environment and to network with people outside of that is a whole different world.
Yeah.
You start different conversations. You don't even have the same targets in common that you have inside a company, particularly a large one. So I think that structure that is offered through networking events, I think will always be important for those who like structure, for those who are new. And for those who are rethinking their messaging and want to try it out on an audience and build some relationships, I think there'll always be a place for it.
Otherwise, it's just siloed conversations. This is your point about you can go and talk to anyone on LinkedIn, but there's nothing uniting those individual conversations. What a networking event gives you, if you think about it, is an icebreaker, and it's permission to engage.
Yes.
I can approach people on LinkedIn and say, oh, I've seen this on your profile. I can start a conversation, but I guarantee there is always an element of suspicion.
Yes.
What does he want? Why is he approaching me? So in theory, we can do that, but you're on the back foot. Whereas if I meet that person at a networking event, it's an unwritten rule that, well, I've given you my permission to start a conversation. And I think that's where, and it's community as well, isn't it? Otherwise it's individualistic.
But I think what we're seeing is that networking has fundamentally changed.
Yes.
You know, we don't go there for the pound signs anymore. Some people do, of course, yeah, they need the business to come from it, and that does happen as a result of being a good networker. But as you're saying, Yvonne, particularly if you've come from corporate, being a business owner is a really lonely place. And to know that each month or each week at this time, I'm going to have my team around me and I'm going to have that conversation and it's going to give me a buzz and I'm going to move forward, I think that can bring as much to you as a business owner as the opportunities that arise for your business as a result of it.
Definitely. Well, Stephen, we would love to talk to you because you're right, but you're a bit wrong. So let's just have that conversation, because it's absolutely on the right lines of what we're doing with networking. But to say don't network, I just think it's a bit misleading, isn't it? So there we go. Let's now talk about Kelly's networking gem. Roll Rob's fancy title.
Thank you, James. So today, this month is sparked by a conversation with the lovely Tam Goldsmith. We met up with her and Sean the other day, didn't we? And she talked about vulnerability. So for me, the word, James is smiling at me already, this is a loaded expression for me. And I have an issue with it. It's probably the wrong word to say, but vulnerability to me means something very different. I'm very happy to say that I can be vulnerable at times. I don't see that as a weakness. I don't see that as a negative thing. I see that as me being a human. I'm not a robot, so I'm going to have good, bad, the ugly. And that's all part of me being me. But the reason I wanted to talk about this today is because after talking to Tam, she was at an expo or a summit recently, and they talked about if you're vulnerable in a conversation, the person you're talking to will probably be vulnerable back. And that leads to a deeper conversation and a deeper relationship build. Yvonne's smiling. She knows
nodding,
all of this. Yeah, she knows all of this.
Happens.
So my point here is I'll quite often come out of a one-to-one and I'll say, Carl, I'll go downstairs and I'll say, oh, you wouldn't believe it. So-and-so does trapeze artistry, or they do knitting, and you and Kearney will look at me and say, how do you find this stuff out when you're having a meeting? And for me, this is about showing a different side of you. Now, I don't want to go into a meeting, as Chris has said, I'm always happy. I might be having a bit of a crappy day. I might have a headache, but I'm okay to say that. I'm all right to say that because it happens in life. And if you do, I don't want to say let your guard down, but if you show a little bit of vulnerability, the person you're talking to then goes into a safe space.
You said to me before, it's about showing you're human, because vulnerability, I think there's a connotation that people think it's those people that sadly kind of use the platform of a conversation to say, oh, everything's going wrong, I've got this challenge in my life. That's not what you're talking about, is it? Because that's arguably kind of sympathy, grandstanding.
Yeah, and sometimes we do just need space to be like that. We need somebody to just
That's
listen.
with your friends, isn't it?
Yeah,
yes,
of course. I think if you're in a breakout room and it's somebody you've just met, I quite often pick up on things in the background, so I want to find out a little bit about that, or, you know, and for me, well, that's strictly not a vulnerability, but you might then open a can of worms which will lead into that space. And all I would want to say to this is don't be frightened of it, because you can have the most amazing conversations, relationship builds by showing a bit of vulnerability, by showing you're not a robot and you are a human. People will look at you differently. They absolutely will. And we were in New York yesterday, and the breakout rooms were done, and one of the visitors came in and he went, thank goodness I had Paul Hill in the breakout room because I was feeling really meh today. Now, if he hadn't have told Paul that, Paul wouldn't have given him the little gem of information that he gave him. And he was buzzing after that meeting. And he said thank you to Paul. But it took him to show that bit of vulnerability to say, actually, I'm not great today, for him to then have a deeper level conversation with Paul, and Paul actually help him as a result of it.
It speeds up the process of building relationships. We're ignoring the fact that there's a relationship expert in the room. Yvonne, have you got anything to say on that point?
I was just listening with huge interest because it's interesting because I would struggle to be vulnerable in the big room.
Yes.
I've seen people do it and it doesn't sit right with me. But that's because I would open up and be more vulnerable one-to-one because I know where it could go.
Yes.
So if we were just having a one-to-one conversation, I might say, oh, I'm nervous about something, or this is on my mind, because I now have the opportunity to gauge whether, one, you pick up on it, and whether there's room for us to do this together, whether you don't pick up on it. And I only lead a little bit, not a lot. You just have to give a little bit, see if the other person picks it up, and then the ball will get rolling.
Yeah.
You can't do that in a big room, because if someone wants to engage, they can't. And then you might feel left hung out to dry, which might be very, very uncomfortable, because if you're already vulnerable, the last thing you want to do is then leave yourself out there.
Yes.
Which is what I find odd when people post these stories on LinkedIn about all this stuff that's happening to them. I'm like, wow, what if you don't get the kind of feedback that you're looking for?
Yes.
Yeah.
Where does that leave you?
Because people will judge you even if they don't comment. There is a judgment, because we're human beings, aren't we?
You'll feel something, you'll think something will happen, and you don't know how that plays out. So I like doing the vulnerable bit one-to-one,
Yes.
not so much in a bigger group.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
I think we need to
isn't it?
rename it Yvonne's Networking Gems.
Yvonne's
dear.
Networking Gem.
No, don't
Maybe Rob
rename
could
it.
change
No
the title.
pressure. No pressure.
Don't change the title. It's Kelly's
Don't change the
Networking Gem.
title.
Thank you, Kelly. Great points. Okay, we're going to move on to our member spotlight with Yvonne. So let me just go through my formal bio that I've thrown together.
Okay.
Not thrown together, carefully crafted.
Carefully organised. Yeah.
Through her business, Dynamic Business Consulting, Yvonne helps business leaders create effective teams. She does this partly by teaching her clients about relationships, how to improve them, and the power of understanding human behaviour.
Shall I correct the business title, or shall I just leave it hanging out there?
What was the business title?
Dynamic Perspective.
What did I say?
Dynamic Business.
Where did that come from?
I don't know. It sounded
Dynamic
good,
Perspective Consulting, Yvonne Guérineau.
but it's all right.
There you are.
I'm asking permission whether you're okay to be corrected.
Absolutely fine. So let's talk about you help businesses harness the power of relationships. They're overlooked, aren't they, in the scheme of business? Why is that of interest to you? How did that come about?
Well, I've got an HR background, so I went into business from psychology degree into what was the personnel world. Now people and culture, it all moves on a little bit. And what always fascinated me about it was that it's all about stuff we do. Who does what, how they do it, how many widgets we produce, how much money we make. But it's always people interacting with each other. And the really fascinating stuff always happened when someone didn't do what they were meant to do, when somebody wanted someone to say something or do something and they didn't get the reaction they wanted, when someone is sad about something that somebody else finds brilliant, when you introduce a change and some people are really on board and other people really are not, and people leave and they surprise you. And people arrive that you think are going to be average and they're amazing. People are constantly surprising you. And I just got more and more interested in the human element of what goes on in the business. Because actually we all work with people. Unless you live alone in a cave and churn out something alone every day, the majority of us are dealing with somebody else.
If you think about the sharp end of business, if you are, even if you're self-employed, what's social media, if not a series of human interactions? What's a sale? It really comes down to the conversation and the relationship you build with the person you're selling to. But why don't we really bother to, that's a leading question. Do people bother to learn about how relationships work?
I think they do. I think in some roles it's encouraged.
Yeah.
I think some people naturally have an interest and they lead with a relationship rather than with task, but we'll get into that in another format. But I think people take it for granted that you are born, you have a relationship with your caregiver, you have a relationship with your friends at school, then you have relationships with people in hobbies. It's just something you do, right? Like you breathe. But actually we all know that how you breathe is open to debate and discussion about the quality of it. What you eat, even though we all do it, is open for debate and discussion about what should you put into your mouth or not put in your mouth. Exercise, it's all the same. We take certain things for granted because we all do it all the time. And I think what I find interesting is the people who struggle with relationships, who don't get the interactions and connections that they want, how much energy they've put into it, how much time they've invested in actually understanding what's going on for them and why it's going on. If they invested as much time in thinking about their interactions as they think about how to get something along the assembly line in a really organised fashion, they might have different encounters with people.
Such a good point. Well, if you want to learn more about this, audience, Only Talks this month, what month we're in, whenever we publish it, is about this topic. Yvonne is the expert, so you can come along to a meeting and learn more. But just for now, one of the things that I noticed when I looked for your profile, the word that jumped out, probably because I know you fairly well now, the word was observation. Was one of your key words. Why do you think, in the context of what we're talking about, observation is such an important skill?
I love that you picked that word out, because you would pick that word out because you like observing things and you like paying attention to detail. Kelly might not pick that
Wouldn't have
word
seen that one.
at all.
No,
So we see what we want to see, right? And you obviously honed in on that word because it's important to you. The reason observation matters is a bit like the vulnerability thing that Kelly was sharing before. If you pay attention to what is coming back at you, pay attention to what's in the room around you, like energetically, I know there's somebody else in the room, even though I'm not actually focusing on somebody else. If you pay attention to what happens around you, you will see things, notice things that people aren't choosing to share with you. They might leak their feelings. They might leak their preferences. Even you just saying, I spotted the word observation, tells me something about you.
Yes.
Because you would have picked up on that word. I wouldn't. I might have picked up the word people or the word relationship or something else. And it just says something about you. So if you pay attention to what's going on, you can learn a lot about people and about yourself extremely quickly.
Do you think that skill, listening, we talk about this a lot, don't we, is becoming a more valuable commodity? Because I feel like even more so since we went into lockdown, the world is obsessed with talking and not listening. Is that a fair assumption? Am I being unfair? And if there is an element of truth in that, can you use that to your advantage when the world is kind of shouting?
Listening's always been on the agenda in the HR people world. 20 years ago, people were putting listening skills into training courses. I think we've always known it's easier to talk than to listen, because to talk is just you blurting out something, or even if it's organised thought, you're sharing something, you're in control. Listening is you having to take your energy away from yourself onto somebody else, and it's a different kind of attention. It's always been harder, and some people are extremely good at it naturally. Most of us have to consciously choose to listen.
What advantage do you think it gives you in business if you can become a better listener?
Huge advantages, because you're actually not just listening to what someone says, but also listening to what they're not saying. So if you hear certain words, you'll also hear the things that they're not saying and they're not doing. It's really hard to explain without going into lots of examples, but I know that if I really, really listen to somebody, as they tell me a story, the way the story unfolds tells me something about them. So, for example, I know somebody, because there's always an example, when I say, how was your day? I will get the day chronologically, from the beginning through to the end. When I ask somebody else about how their day was, I get the highlights, the best thing that happened, the person they met, the surprising thing that caught them off guard. Both of those people, just by listening to the way they presented it, not just the story itself, I found out something about who they are and how their brain works and how they process the world. It gives me an insight into them, but I have to really pay attention, and that's hard work.
Very helpful, isn't it, for working out what the market needs at networking, listening?
Hugely. I think the people that do get the best business opportunities from networking are people that listen and react on what they hear, not what they think they hear, I think is the difference.
We talked about this in Only Talks, didn't we, with Pete Avery, about the fact that if you just go networking, because remember, what you say at networking is probably very similar to what it currently says on your website and what your social media bio says. And if you haven't really thought that through by listening to what people actually want to hear, you're just saying stuff, aren't you? it starts by listening and going, well, does anyone want that thing that I'm going to now tell you need?
Definitely.
You only find that out by listening, don't you?
Yeah.
Although I think sometimes in a networking room, people who are nervous
Yes.
find it hard to listen when they're waiting for their turn.
Yes.
And that can be a bit of a hindrance for people, where sometimes then the one-to-ones really pay off as well. Because in a one-to-one, you know you're going to just engage with one person, and therefore you don't have to worry about waiting your turn to speak, which some people find nerve-wracking.
That is a good point, isn't it? But again, even within that one-to-one, I think people have a tendency to say, I want to tell you more about what I do, rather than saying, well, this is what I do. What do you think about that?
Yeah.
Is that something that you've encountered? Is it something you're interested in? Because that's where you're going to learn what they maybe need, isn't it?
Yeah, some people are really good at asking questions and then they just let you run, and then, which is great. But then, if they don't ever speak back, then of course it doesn't work. It becomes a monologue. Yeah. But yeah, the nice thing about a halfway mark on conversations is that you kind of know if you've skewed one way or the other, that's your chance to pull it back. If then people don't take it, they don't take it.
Yeah.
But if you don't feel heard, or you don't feel that someone's taking an interest in you, which listening does, it gives people a sense of that you're interested in them.
Yeah.
If somebody misses the cue, they miss the cue.
And if you're coming out of a breakout room going, I monopolised that conversation, we need another one-to-one, check your behaviour the next time. So it's like, you want another one-to-one because you didn't let me talk?
Yeah.
Am I being a bit unfair?
A little bit. Sometimes it happens, doesn't it? But yes, I see your point.
It can, yeah, you can get carried away. I guess what you have to ask yourself is, in that one-to-one, will it be different?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or will it just be a one-to-one that is similar?
Absolutely. Because it is exhausting when you are really good at listening. I can think of many a time where I've listened for a long, long time and I've thoroughly enjoyed it, but I've ended the conversation like I could sleep now.
I've done hour-long one-to-ones, and I can remember consciously thinking, we've done 45 minutes, you haven't asked me one question. And then it becomes almost right, I'm going to get to the end of this to prove a point, making sure you haven't asked me any questions.
You've remembered that one though, so
But the other thing to bear in mind is, again, nerves. And I've come back to it twice now, but some people are nervous in these interactions because they're new to it and they don't know what to do. And sometimes people speak when they're nervous.
Yes.
So they have to almost get that off their chest first.
That is a very good point, because I think I do hear quite a lot people will be bitten by not a bad one, a one-to-one that has gone that way and they've not been able to speak, and they will be furious about it, and they will see, for me, that's just a moment in my time. That's fine. I've given that person time and hopefully they've got what they needed from it, and you move on, don't you? You don't let one scenario taint the rest of it, because as you say, that person could be extremely nervous, or they could have super passionate. They may not have made a sale yet and they just want to get all of this stuff out to you.
Yeah, that's so true, isn't it?
So you've got to just be in the moment and let it take it. And if you can try and pull it back round, of course, then that's beneficial. But you have to go with it. You really do.
Yeah, definitely.
People do have a habit of assuming intention out of behaviour.
Exactly.
And actually the two aren't the same. What I do and the reason I do it can be two very different things. And sometimes people just say or do something with good intention, and we've talked about it already today. You can have good intentions that just doesn't come over the way you want.
Yeah.
Very good, yes.
But that's why you want to do it more than once a month, because you have a chance to make it back.
Yes.
So if you had that encounter this week and you went, I don't know about that made me feel a bit, If you see them again in a week's time, or they're interacting on social media, you get a chance to say, it must have been a bad day, because actually they weren't like that the next time I saw them.
That's true.
It's true.
You're more likely to give them a second chance.
Networking experience. How did you? Because you talked about networking in the corporate world. How has it changed for you? What's your experience?
How's it changed? I think my attitude and my relationship with networking has changed. I used to think it was about selling. So when I was corporate life, it wasn't. It was all about career building, who you knew, and how you could progress. Then it was about selling when I came out. Then I realised that actually this is something else. This is about getting to know people, and you can't assume that your clients are in the room. That totally blew my mind. And I didn't really get comfortable with LinkedIn until I realised that really one-to-one, every single conversation is a conversation. That's when something clicked for me, and I went, oh, that's just a person having an opinion. And if they were stood in a room next to me today over coffee and I heard that comment, would I say something? Would I talk to that person? And if I would, then I try to do it on LinkedIn, or I try to do it in networking. And if I get a feeling that someone doesn't want to engage with me, I walk away. It's more like real people. And it took me quite a long time, I think, to come round, because I was expecting it to be a marketing or a sales activity and to learn the rules and to understand the processes and understand.
How do you do it?
It was a task. I was all in the task of doing. And then something clicked and I went, oh, you're a relationship person, Yvonne. You could actually treat it like a relationship. And then it's like, bing, the light bulb went on. But even if you're a relationship person naturally, I think you can get caught into the whole algorithm talk.
Yeah.
That's
in
true.
LinkedIn and think it's a task, when in actual fact it's just a bunch of people.
So what do you get from networking now?
People. I get relationships. Interestingly, I've made more friends out of networking than I expected. I found suppliers that do things that I didn't even know existed. I've got engaged in conversations that I wouldn't have got involved in. People tell me stuff that I would never have found out because I don't read that sort of stuff in the news. People tell me things. It's just broadened my whole horizon.
I love that.
That's very cool.
It's
And
just
what
changed
about
my-
online? How have you found that transition? Was it an easy one for you to do online networking?
I'm like Kelly. I need people. I need real people. Not one or the other, but both. So I like the online thing for the convenience of it. I like the fact that I can turn up at a set time and be finished when it's finished. I like the fact I can go straight onto LinkedIn and do my follow-up afterwards. But I want real people. So a good one-to-one will lead to coffee or a walk.
Yeah.
That's how they progress for me, to real interactions with real people.
Why do you describe that as real interactions with real people?
Because I can feel the energy. I think Zoom will give you so much. It can give you a lot. It really can give you a lot. And I've built good relationships through it. But something's different when you can hug someone. For me, there's something else that comes after. But I don't think you have to choose. I don't see why. I think there's a market for the online thing. I think there's a market for face-to-face. I don't see why you have to choose. It's a bit like nobody ever said you had to choose to have real conversations or use the telephone. People use the telephone and still met people.
Yeah, true.
Now all we've done is we've added a video element to it.
Yes.
But nothing's changed. People still used to come for appointments and meetings or call. It's just that we've added a picture.
Could you, for example, then work with someone that was either because it was so far away, prohibitive to meet them, or they actually had a preference to say, Yvonne, I want to work with you, but I'm more comfortable just doing it all online. Would you be okay with that?
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I think it might slow things down.
Okay.
Depending on what we're working on. Teams is more difficult. I can run a workshop with 27 people in a room. I cannot get the same energy into an online room for a workshop. I can't. I don't know how. I'm sure somebody can. I can't. It's not my skill set. One of my real skills is my ability to broaden my view. So I can be sitting in a space and see a room of 27 people and I can see something playing out over here, just out of my periphery, that I want to pick up on in a minute. As soon as I've got them doing something, I will turn around and I will engage with that person over here who I just have a sense isn't quite with me. It just doesn't work on a screen in the same way.
It's funny, isn't it? See, I find it the other way round now.
But maybe that's just
because
personal
Zoom,
preference.
everyone is presented in a uniform way. Whereas if I'm in a room, there's all this other information.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm trying to read a room, I did it yesterday doing the education where I could see where people were drifting. And I actually said to them, because it was about messaging and knowing when to stop, and I called it. I said, I'm going to actually wrap up because I can see I've lost you. And I think I find that very easy to do on Zoom. I think that's partly an adjustment, isn't it?
I don't know if that's practice or whether that's personal
It
preference.
could be.
I don't know if I will find that out with time.
Yeah, I agree.
At the moment, my sense is it's personal preference that I prefer energetically to be in a room.
Yes.
But that's not to say I couldn't build the skill. The question is, do I want to?
That's the
thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
But that's relationships in general. It's always a choice. Do you want that relationship to build? Do you want that skill? Do you want to be able to listen better? There's always choice. At the moment, I'm choosing to do both.
Yes.
I get more of a buzz out of being in a room with people.
Yes.
If we now did this conversation and we were all in separate rooms, would I engage as much? I don't know. But we could try. People
But
do.
that's the beauty, isn't it, that we've seen with doing online networking, because it is so efficient. It means that it leaves time if you do want to go for that walk, which would have perhaps felt like maybe an overindulgence before for a for a relationship building. In theory, because I don't know where the time has gone, but in theory, you should have the time to be able to do that now, because we're saving you time with online networking. But I think that's the readjustment, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's relative to what you do, isn't it? You holding a relationship workshop is very different to going to a networking meeting.
Yes.
A networking meeting is about building the contacts to decide whether you then do want to go and do that in-person meet up with them. So I do agree with
And
that.
it's true, actually, and there are elements of what I do that I can quite happily do on Zoom. Like when there's a presentational element to it, to present ideas and get people thinking, but you can't really go deep. And some of the things that happen when you're in a workshop space, if you have a sense that somebody needs something, everyone can be doing something, you can just quickly take them to one side and have a chat. Now, in a big room on a platform like that, would I just pull someone out and stick them into a separate space, just have a quick chat and check on them? I don't think I would. And I wouldn't want to type it. I'd want to do it face to face.
Yeah,
That's a good point.
very good.
But times and places, nobody stopped using the telephone because we had Zoom.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I don't think we have to always make a choice. I think we're allowed to have a bit of everything.
Love that.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Yvonne. Good stuff. Well, there we go. Another Only show. A lot of stuff packed in there. So thank you for watching, listening, like, subscribe, comment, share. Come and visit us at Only. This has been the Only Networking Show, and we'll see you again next time.